A poor mechanic helps a billionaire's disabled daughter. Her mom couldn't stop crying. The Texas sun was merciless that afternoon, spilling over the wide plains like molten brass. Heat shimmered off the blacktop as cicadas buzzed in the oak trees behind Carter's auto and body. Inside the modest garage, Matthew Carter wiped sweat from his brow, the scent of motor oil clinging to his shirt. He'd just finished replacing a radiator on an old Dodge pickup when the unmistakable cough of an engine misfire caught his ear. He looked up, squinting through the glare. A sleek silver sedan, the kind that didn't belong anywhere near the outskirts of Austin, limped its way into his gravel lot, its front end rattling softly. The contrast was almost cinematic. The luxury car rolled to a halt, dust billowing behind it, and for a moment, everything went still. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. Tall, poised, designer sunglasses perched on her nose. Her presence radiated wealth and control. She looked around as if she wasn't entirely sure she'd stopped in the right place. From the passenger side, a soft thump followed. A wheelchair had been unloaded with practiced ease. The young woman in it moved with careful precision, her legs braced in metallic supports that gleamed beneath cropped jeans. She looked about 19, pale, quiet, and withdrawn, with hair tucked neatly behind her ears and eyes that scanned everything while making contact with nothing. Matthew wiped his hands on a rag and stepped forward. "Afternoon," he said with a nod. "Car giving you trouble?" The woman took a breath. "Yes. It started rattling about 10 miles back. I was heading to Austin, but this was the nearest place on the map." Her accent was crisp. "Northeastern, probably. Not Texas." "I can take a look," Matthew said, already circling the car. "Name's Matt Carter." "Susan Walker," she replied. "And this is my daughter, Emily." Emily didn't respond. She kept her eyes on the gravel. Matthew popped the hood and bent over the engine. After a few moments, he let out a low whistle. "Loose belt and one bad coil. Nothing major. I can have you back on the road in an hour or two." "That would be great," Susan said. She looked around, as if unsure where to wait. "You're welcome to sit inside," Matthew offered, gesturing to a small office with an old fan and 2 beat-up chairs. "Cooler in there. I've got water and Coke." Susan hesitated, then pushed the wheelchair toward the office. The girl moved stiffly, her face twitching in discomfort each time the chair hit a pebble. Matthew watched her silently. He'd seen that look before, the kind that came from more than just tired joints. Pain, constant and unrelenting, poorly managed. He crouched near the office door as they settled in. "Miss Emily," he said gently, "if you don't mind me saying, those braces on your legs look like they're fighting you instead of helping." Susan tensed immediately. "They were custom-built in Boston. Very expensive." "I'm sure they were," Matthew said calmly. "But money doesn't always mean precision. Mind if I take a closer look?" Emily finally looked at him, not fully, just a flicker, and then down at her legs. After a long pause, she nodded once. He approached slowly, like he would an injured animal. No sudden movements, no loud words. Just quiet observation. His fingers moved over the braces with practiced care, never touching skin, only metal and straps. "See here?" he pointed. "This hinge. Too tight. Doesn't give with your knee, and this joint's off by a degree or two, enough to torque the hip every time you move. That's why it hurts, isn't it?" Emily blinked, startled. Her lips parted, but no words came. She didn't need to speak. Her face said everything. Susan crossed her arms. "We've been to top specialists, orthopedic surgeons, biomechanical engineers. I'm not doubting them," Matthew said. "But I've rebuilt engines since I was 12. I've built custom rigs for vets who lost limbs. I know how moving parts are supposed to work. These..." He tapped one brace gently. "These weren't made by someone who understands force dynamics. They're fighting her natural motion." Susan looked unconvinced, defensive. But Emily whispered, barely audible, "Can you fix it?" Matthew looked at her then. really looked. There was a quiet fire beneath the stillness. Pain had dulled her, but it hadn't broken her. "I think I can," he said softly. "Won't charge you. I just need some time. A few tools. Maybe parts from a bike or two." Susan was already shaking her head. "You're not a doctor." "No, ma'am," he replied. "But I don't need a medical degree to see when a hinge is misaligned. I'm offering because I know I can help." Emily turned to her mother. "Please." That one word, fragile but firm, cut through the tension like a blade. Susan stared at her daughter. Something shifted in her eyes, the kind of fear only a parent knows, the fear of false hope, the fear of trying one more time and watching it fail again. She looked at Matthew. "If anything goes wrong," "It won't," he said. "But I'll take full responsibility if it does." Silence stretched. Then with a tight nod, Susan relented. Matthew smiled, just barely, and stood up. "I'll need her braces for a bit. I can give her a temp set I made for a boy with a similar frame. Not perfect, but comfortable." As he disappeared into the back of the garage, Susan turned to her daughter. "You trust him?" she asked softly. Emily nodded. For the first time in a long time, something like curiosity flickered in her eyes. "Yeah," she said. "I do." Matthew closed the garage the next morning, flipped the sign to "Closed for repairs," and got to work. Not on a car this time, but on something far more delicate and far more important. He cleared his main workbench, laying out the metal braces like they were components of a classic Mustang. Every bolt, hinge, and strap told a story, not just of engineering flaws, but of pain, struggle, and the kind of exhaustion that lives in the body for years. He ran his fingers over the frame, frowning. Whoever had designed these had focused on structure, not function. There was rigidity where there should have been flow, and stress points where there should have been relief. He sighed and grabbed a pad of paper, sketching quick adjustments, hinge angle corrections, balance redistribution, and shock absorption tweaks. He didn't need a blueprint. The design was already forming in his mind, like a puzzle coming into focus. In the far corner of the shop, Emily sat quietly in the temporary braces Matthew had fitted her with. They were rough, assembled from old parts and spare tubing, but far less restrictive. She didn't speak much, but she watched, always watched, with eyes that missed nothing. Susan sat nearby on a folding chair, flipping through emails on her phone, but her attention kept drifting to her daughter. She hadn't seen Emily this alert in years. Matthew noticed. "You always this quiet?" he asked, not looking up from his sketches. Emily shrugged. "That's a yes," Susan murmured without lifting her gaze. Matthew chuckled softly. "Well, quiet's fine. I just figured, if you had ideas about how these things should feel, now's a good time to tell me." Emily tilted her head. "They shouldn't feel like a cage." Matthew smiled. "Exactly what I was thinking." He gathered parts from the walls, steel joints from an old dirt bike, a set of hydraulic springs from a lawn tractor, even a few composite rods salvaged from a wrecked carbon frame bicycle. As he worked, he explained what each piece was for, half talking to himself, half inviting Emily in. "This spring's gonna give you more forward push when you step, less strain on the hip flexors." Emily frowned. "Most people just say, it helps you walk better." "Well, I'm not most people." She almost smiled at that. Almost. Later that day, as the sun dipped low over the trees, Emily's curiosity finally broke through. "You said you've helped veterans," she said quietly. Matthew nodded, adjusting a grinding tool. "Yeah. Buddy of mine lost a leg in Iraq. VA gave him a generic prosthetic that kept throwing his back out. I built him something that moved with his body, not against it." "Why not go into medicine?" she asked. He paused. "Because I don't want to fix people. I just want to fix the things that slow them down." Emily was quiet for a while then. "I fell when I was 8, horseback riding, Spinal injury, L2 to L5. Matthew looked up, surprised. She hadn't offered that before. Therapy, surgeries, braces, she continued. Dozens of them. Every doctor said I was lucky to still have partial use, but it always hurt. Always. Matthew set down his tools. I'm sorry. Emily shrugged. I used to scream in my sleep. Then I just stopped talking about it. Matthew nodded slowly. I get it. Pain makes you small, like you have to fold in on yourself to survive. She looked at him, really looked. And in that silence, something passed between them. Not pity, not charity. Just understanding. By the third day, the new braces were taking shape. They were unlike anything Emily had worn. Slimmer, jointed with reactive hinges that adjusted tension based on her movement, with a custom-fitted socket around her calf that redistributed weight with every step. Susan remained skeptical, hovering in the background with arms crossed. You've never built medical equipment before. No, Matthew admitted. But I've built machines that move through mountains and across deserts. And I've rebuilt a kid's wheelchair out of a motorcycle chassis so he could ride trails again. He held up one of the finished braces. I'm not trying to impress doctors. I'm trying to make her life easier. Emily reached for it, no hesitation. Matthew helped her strap in the left leg, then the right. She sat still for a long moment, adjusting her posture, testing the fit. Then, slowly she stood. Her hands gripped the armrests, her brows furrowed, but she rose to her feet. Matthew stepped back, watching every micro-movement like a mechanic watches a test drive. The knees bent naturally. The hips didn't torque. She shifted her weight. Then she took one step. No wince, no hitch in her breath. Another step, then another. By the fifth step, tears welled up in her eyes. Not from pain, but from the lack of it. Susan stood frozen. Emily, it doesn't hurt, Emily whispered. Her mother took a step forward, hand trembling. She hadn't seen her daughter walk without grimacing in over a decade. Emily took another step, then turned, slowly, her face alight with a fragile kind of joy that hadn't surfaced in years. I can walk, Mom. Susan covered her mouth, trying, and failing, to contain a sob. She knelt beside her daughter, holding on to her as if anchoring herself to reality. Matthew turned away, giving them the moment. Emily looked over her mother's shoulder and met his gaze. You didn't just fix the braces, she said. You fixed me. He shook his head gently. No, kiddo. That was all you. I just got out of your way. 2 weeks after Emily's first real steps, a sleek black car pulled up once more to Matthew Carter's garage. This time, it wasn't broken. It purred like a dream, which made sense, considering the new engine tune-up Matthew had thrown in without charging a dime. Susan Walker stepped out in a crisp navy dress, her heels crunching against the gravel. She looked out of place again, not because of wealth, but because of intention. Something was different in her face now, less guarded, more determined. I'd like you to come to dinner, she said without preamble. At our home, Saturday evening, just a small gathering. Matthew leaned against the open hood of a Chevy he'd been restoring. Dinner with a billionaire sounds above my pay grade. She smiled tightly. It's not about pay grade. It's about gratitude. And possibilities. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, long as I don't need a tux. The Walker estate was perched on a hill overlooking the Colorado River, a sprawling modern structure of glass and stone with views that looked like they belonged on a postcard. Matthew arrived in his old F-150, wearing a freshly ironed button-down and boots he'd dusted off for the occasion. He didn't need to impress anyone, and he didn't plan to. Inside, the house buzzed with activity. A dozen guests mingled with glasses of wine in hand. Investors, scientists, philanthropic elites. Susan was in her element, floating from group to group, charming and composed. But her eyes lit up when she saw Matthew enter. You came, she said, genuinely pleased. Come on. There are people you should meet. The introductions came fast. A surgeon from Johns Hopkins, a biomedical engineer from Stanford, a senator's chief of staff. Each shook Matthew's hand with the cautious curiosity reserved for someone they didn't quite understand. And then there was Emily, standing, no chair in sight. Her gait was still cautious, but every movement was steady, confident. She wore a deep green dress and the same braces Matthew had rebuilt, now polished and modified for longer wear. He smiled when he saw her. "You clean up nice." "You should see me on stairs now," she said with a grin. "I'm practically reckless." They both laughed, an easy shared sound that came from somewhere new. Dinner was served on the back terrace, overlooking the lights of downtown Austin in the distance. Between courses, Susan stood and clinked her glass lightly. "Everyone," she said, her voice clear and composed, "thank you for joining us. You've all heard some version of what brought us here tonight, but I'd like to introduce the man behind that story." All heads turned toward Matthew. "This is Matthew Carter," Susan continued, "a mechanic, a craftsman, and the only person who, after 11 years and countless specialists, helped my daughter walk without pain." Soft murmurs filled the space. He did it without a degree, without a lab, without millions in funding, just tools, experience, and heart. There was warm applause. Matthew shifted uncomfortably, rising slowly to his feet. "I appreciate the kind words," he said, "but I didn't do anything miraculous. I just saw something that didn't make sense, and I fixed it." He paused, then looked around the table. "You all build amazing things," he continued, "but you build them for people who can afford them. That's not a criticism, just a fact. There are thousands of folks out there who've given up hope because hope has a price tag." Silence settled over the table. "I want to change that," Matthew said. "I want to build braces, supports, mobility rigs, affordable, adaptable, and made with the same care I gave Emily's. For veterans, for kids, for families with nothing left to spend. That's my dream." He sat down. No flourish, no plea, just truth. The silence broke with applause, real, grounded, and deeply moved. Susan leaned toward him after dessert. "I want to offer you something," she said. "A position at Walker Biotech, Director of Adaptive Design, 6 figures, full lab, full team." Matthew stared at her, then shook his head gently. "Thank you," he said. "But no." She blinked. "No. I didn't do this to move up," he said. "I did it because someone needed help. I don't want a title. I want a workshop, some tools, and people to build for." Susan leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly in contemplation. "You're either the most principled man I've ever met," she said, "or the most stubborn." He smiled. "Probably both." Later that week, Matthew returned to his garage and found an envelope waiting in the mailbox. Inside was a simple letter, unsigned, with a note. "Every dream needs fuel. Consider this your first tank." Attached, a certified check for $250,000. Matthew looked around the quiet shop, heart pounding. No name, no conditions. He didn't need to guess where it came from. By the next morning, he was sketching blueprints for something he'd imagined but never dared to build. A full fabrication center, equipped with modular workstations, 3D printing rigs, testing ramps, and therapy benches. A place where people could come not just for help, but for hope. He named it Owen Mobility Solutions, after his father, a man who never had much but taught him to give everything. As autumn crept into Texas with cooler winds and golden skies, Emily began visiting the garage more often, sometimes just to walk laps, sometimes to ask questions about gears and materials, and sometimes just to talk. "I've been thinking about what I want to do," she told Matthew one evening. "Yeah," he said, adjusting a lathe. "What's on your mind?" "I want to study physical therapy," she said. "Real therapy. Not just for me, for others. Kids like me who didn't have anyone like you." Matthew looked at her, strong, steady, transformed. "I think you'd be incredible at it," he said. She smiled. And this time, it wasn't just joy, it was purpose. The old garage was gone. Not the foundation, not the structure, but the soul of it had evolved. In its place stood the Owen Mobility Solutions Center, its new sign gleaming in the soft light of a Texas morning. Beneath the name, etched into brushed steel, read a simple inscription, "For those who walk through pain and rise above it." Inside, the smell of motor oil had been replaced by the scent of fresh paint, warm metal, and hope. Workbenches lined the walls, but instead of car parts, they were stacked with 3D printed joint pieces, brace prototypes, and modular fittings. There were therapy ramps in one corner, a gait analysis floor in another, and a small waiting area filled with families, veterans, and kids, all hoping for a chance to walk easier. Matthew Carter moved through the space with quiet focus, clipboard in hand, adjusting fittings for a young boy named Luis. The boy had come from El Paso, his mother having scraped together gas money after seeing a video of Emily walking on her new braces. That video, shared by Susan's foundation without Matthew's knowledge, had gone viral. Luis smiled as Matthew adjusted a shin support. "Is it supposed to feel like this?" he asked. "Not supposed to feel like anything," Matthew replied. "It's supposed to feel like you. Give it a spin." Luis took a few steps, then looked up with wide eyes. "It doesn't pinch." Matthew grinned. "That's the goal, kid." Applause broke out softly in the background, and Matthew looked up to see Emily watching from the doorway. She was leaning casually against the wall, arms crossed, a clipboard of her own under one arm. "He's already doing better than I did," she said with a mock sigh. "You screamed the first time I asked you to stand up," Matthew teased. "I did not scream. You made a noise that scared the life out of my dog." Emily laughed. "You didn't even have a dog." "Still scared one, somewhere." Their banter was easy now, full of history and humor. Emily had changed, not just physically, but inwardly. There was confidence in her step, joy in her voice, and clarity in her gaze. "You're getting good at this," Matthew said, nodding toward her clipboard. "Thanks. I've been shadowing therapists at the rehab center downtown. I start my certification course next semester." "You're gonna change lives," he said. She tilted her head. "I just want to give back what I got." Across the room, Susan stood by the coffee counter watching them. She looked out of place in her tailored blazer, but something about her was softer now, less guarded, more human. Matthew joined her, rubbing grease from his hands with a towel. "You did this," she said quietly, looking around. "You took a rundown garage and turned it into a place where people heal." "I just gave it a new purpose," Matthew replied. "The real work happens when people walk in here ready to try again." She nodded, then reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "This came in the mail," she said. "Thought you should see it." Matthew opened it and scanned the contents. It was from the governor's office, an official commendation for innovation in community medical support, along with a grant for further expansion. He let out a low whistle. "Guess I'll have to build an east wing." Susan laughed lightly, then grew serious. "Matthew, there's something I should have told you a long time ago." He looked at her. "That check, the one that helped you get started, it came from me." He wasn't surprised, not really, but hearing it still hit something in his chest. "I wanted it to be anonymous because I knew you'd never accept it if you knew." He nodded slowly, processing. "You were right. But I wanted to help," she said. "Not because I felt guilty, because I believed in what you were doing. I still do." He looked at her, then extended his hand. "Thank you." She shook it, and for the first time there was no tension in the grip, just mutual respect. Later that afternoon, the waiting room quieted as a young girl named Mia stepped nervously into the workshop. She was 6, with curly hair and braces that clanked awkwardly against her knees. Her mother held her hand, trying to encourage her forward. Emily crouched down to Mia's level, smiling gently. "Hey, you're Mia, right?" The girl nodded shyly. "You know, when I first came here, I was scared too. I thought it was going to hurt. But you know what? It didn't. Mia blinked. Really? Really, Emily said. You know why? Because the man who works here, he builds things that help people feel like superheroes. Matthew watched from a distance, arms crossed, a soft smile forming. Emily extended her hand to Mia. Want to try walking with me? The girl hesitated, then nodded. Together, they took a few steps. Slow at first, then steadier. Mia giggled. There it is, Emily whispered. The first step forward. As the sun dipped low outside, casting golden streaks through the wide garage doors, Matthew looked around the room. The old garage that had once been filled with broken cars was now filled with possibility. He walked to the wall where a photo hung, an old black and white image of his father standing beside a battered truck, tools in hand, grease on his shirt. Above it, a small plaque read, "He taught me how to build. I chose to build for others." Matthew touched the edge of the frame, then turned back toward the hum of the center. Laughter, movement, new beginnings. And just beyond the noise, a quiet miracle repeating itself, one step at a time.